Mr. Smith became director recently, but he immediately decided to change the office's charter. First, he revised the salary fund, bypassing his rate. Being a miser, he reduced the salary of almost all the staff. Many people almost the same day wrote a letter of resignation. Those who remained wanted to escape from there and continued to endure the antics of the new director only due to circumstances. The biggest problem was finding cleaners. No one wanted to go wash the floors and rub the door handles to a shine all day for a meager salary. It was the mania of the new boss. Mrs. Harris, deputy personnel officer, urged the director to add some money to the cleaner lady's salary almost every day. After all, they will never find employees for such a salary. But every morning at the meeting, Mr. Smith only said angrily that the office was already full of dirt and dust. He almost yelled at Mrs. Harris, "If you don't find a cleaning lady soon, I'll make cleaning up your job." The woman herself was ready to run anywhere from this monster of savings, but she perfectly understood that it was not so easy to find a job at her age. So every time, she silently listened to his unreasonable reproaches and demands. At the next morning meeting, he once again expressed his dissatisfaction with the work of his deputy because the cleaners were never found. Mr. Smith said angrily as he approached the window, "Is it really that hard for you to find a cleaner lady? After all, there are a lot of people who want to work in a stable company." At some point, he silently froze and began to look at something in the distance. A very sparsely dressed woman was neatly stacking cardboard boxes by the trash cans. He said, smiling slyly and turning towards his deputy, "Are you saying that no one is coming to you? Ads and advertisements are not helping you? See how it's supposed to be done." He opened the window wide and leaned half a length out of it. Mr. Smith called out, "Hey, poor thing, come to my place for a minute. Maybe I can help you." But the girl didn't stop her work even for a second and continued to fold the cardboard. The boss was surprised, but was not going to back down. There was even some excitement in his eyes. He turned to Mrs. Harris, winked at her, and called the guard. He said to the guy in the uniform as soon as he appeared, "Bring this miserable woman here, no matter what it costs you." When the girl entered the office, he realized that she was completely deaf. She had a hearing aid, but apparently it was not quite serviceable or from very cheap options. The beggar girl was about 30 years old. Surprisingly, she turned out to be a very neat girl. Her hands were clean, as were her clothes and hair. The lack of makeup made her face look younger. Her hair was neatly combed and tied into a bun. Her clothes are old but clean. True, it was not an age and size, but at least without the smell inherent in homeless people. The director apparently remembered that the deaf can read lips, so he began to explain very slowly, pronouncing each sound. "Do you want to get paid? You will clean the office." The girl stood silently for a couple of minutes, looking at the office and those present. She then silently nodded in agreement. This gesture seemed to lift the director to the Olympus of victory. He turned proudly to Mrs. Harris, who was quietly watching what was happening. "Is it impossible to find a cleaning lady? Maybe you have forgotten how to select staff. Here's a lesson for you. This beggar girl would agree for less pay. By the way, until I told her salary, think I can reduce it?" But when he saw the insane look of his deputy, he apparently realized that even this cleaning lady would run away for even less money, and he didn't continue to promote this topic. Molly, that was the name of the deaf girl, became sometimes going to the office long before the start of the working day. She diligently washed, cleaned, and wiped everything that caught her eye. In a week, she made the office unrecognizable. Everything shone with cleanliness and sterility. But this didn't help to win the team over to her. Literally every second employee tried behind her back to express some kind of mockery at the deaf poor girl, developing the topic to insane laughter in the office. Everyone understood that behind her back, they could say whatever they wanted. The girl's hearing aid was cheap and old. Nevertheless, she sometimes heard some jokes addressed to her, but there were so many difficult moments in her life that she could well close her eyes to an offensive word. Each time, she thought only that the sound would soon end, and she would leave for her quiet little world where no one would offend her for sure. After work, she hurried to the outskirts of the city, where there was an old abandoned house, but with a roof. She lived there lately, but not alone. Every time Molly saw an unfortunate cat or dog, she couldn't get past them, and she took them all to her little home. 3 different kitties, 1 cat, and 2 dogs were always waiting for her return. She was ready to listen to ridicule in the office just for the sake of her pets. After all, Now her household could sometimes feast on some kind of poor or inexpensive sausages, in addition to bread and cheap milk. Molly could drink water herself with a piece of bread in the evening, but she spent the money received after hard-working days on something tasty for her pets. After all, it was their loving glances that could quickly brighten up a hard-working day. Mrs. Harris was pleased with the executive and clean cleaning lady. The office literally shone with cleanliness. This despite the fact that the employees continued to make fun of the unfortunate girl behind her back. But the most surprising thing was that the director again turned out to be dissatisfied. It turns out that the beggar girl didn't justify his hopes. True, he couldn't even explain to himself what he expected from her. But every day, a silent girl with very intelligent eyes began to win the favor of her colleagues. Even those who recently made fun of her realized that Molly didn't always wander through the garbage dumps. Her speech was laconic, but very competent. She could sometimes say such phrases that made even people with education think. Sometimes they got the impression that she understands a lot, but doesn't show it. At this time, the affairs of the office, and in particular the director, went downhill. Mr. Smith chastised everyone every morning, as if looking for someone to blame for his failure as an economist. The performance of the branch began to fall catastrophically. The embittered director fired people by several people almost every day. Employees talked behind his back that he would soon be alone in his entire office. The company owner increasingly began to visit them with checks. He didn't like that this branch had gone to the very last step in a short time. But every time before the arrival of the company owner, Mr. Smith literally intimidated employees with all sorts of hardships. His goal was to create the perfect picture. However, the company owner at the age of 35 achieved everything himself and was not going to lose a developed business. He saw that in this office, some kind of heavy atmosphere literally hung in the air. When he arrived there again, the owner stated that sanitization was being carried out in all branches of the company, and all employees were entitled to a paid day off. While all the employees, including the director, were resting, the office was in full swing. Video cameras were installed in each room and connected to the owner's computer. Of course, only he and the video surveillance company knew about this. Mr. Jones really wanted to know what was really going on in this office. Therefore, he went to such a cunning move to figure it out and save this branch of the company. Every day from morning until the closing of the branch, he began to monitor what was happening at the facility. Slowly, he collected fact after fact, pointing to the reasons for leaving the last positions of the once successful branch. One day, Mr. Jones was very surprised when, during one of his meetings, he saw an amazingly well-written business development plan. He skimmed through the material and looked up in surprise at Mr. Smith. Who did it? Mr. Smith realized that the owner was interested in the material, so he modestly lowered his eyes and said, "I tried very hard. I didn't sleep for several nights, and I was sure that you would like it." The first thing that confused the owner was the clearly feminine, neat handwriting. He had already read the explanatory notes of the failed director several times and knew his clumsy handwriting well. In addition, in the intervening time, he was able to learn that the mind of this man was as torturous as his handwriting. Mr. Jones decided to watch the video recordings. He wanted to see who made this plan. The owner was very surprised when he noticed how the cleaning lady worked on these materials almost until the morning. At the same time, she was immersed in her work. Either she thought for a few minutes, or she quickly began to write. It was evident that she didn't even keep track of time. At the same time, the girl drew graphs so easily and quickly, as if she had been doing this all her life. The next morning, Mr. Smith was called into the company owner's office and stood like a boy, his eyes on the floor. The business owner was angry. In the office, everyone was sitting, afraid to move and get under a hot hand. "Do you understand that you almost destroyed my branch with your lies and fraud? In addition, I am shocked how many employees I have lost because of your rudeness. You fired all the best people, but when you tried to appropriate other people's work, I couldn't stand aside. I hope you have 10 minutes to pack your things and leave the walls of my firm once and for all." The former director immediately headed towards the exit, hunched over and turning pale. But he still managed to hear how Mr. Jones asked the female secretary to invite a deaf girl who cleans the office. When Molly timidly entered his office, he gestured to the chair in front of him. "Sit down. I want to know your true face, because you are very smart and have not lived like this all your life." The girl, a little bewildered, made it clear that this was true. Being deaf, but not dumb, she began to talk in a low voice, staring somewhere out the window. Molly was born into a very poor family, but from childhood, she loved to learn everything new. She diligently did her homework herself, when her parents in the next room drank alcohol and arranged drunken showdowns. From the 3rd grade, she found a secluded corner in an abandoned house not far from their apartment. Until graduation, she did all her homework there when her parents were drunk. In the morning, she quietly ran home to get clothes and a briefcase while her parents were sleeping and ran to school. Despite such conditions, Molly was able to graduate with honors and without any problems entered the College of Economics. All teachers loved this smart and purposeful student. She was ready to help her fellow students at any moment. No one had any doubts that Molly would receive an honors degree, and it happened. Economics was her favorite subject and became her lifelong dream. There, she met her first love. Kevin was a year older. When they saw each other in the corridor of the university, they knew at first sight that they fell in love with each other. The guy was from a very wealthy family, and rich parents were categorically against a smart but impoverished daughter-in-law. The feelings of young people were so strong that Kevin proposed to the girl, saying that he wanted to be with her all his life. Soon they went to visit friends outside the city. The mood was great, especially since they were supposed to get married in a week. They had to go a little to the country house, where everyone was already waiting for them, but suddenly a very thick fog descended. Visibility was very poor. They didn't even understand at what point the headlights of an oncoming car shone directly into the windshield. A terrible screech of brakes and emptiness. When she regained consciousness, she was in the ambulance. Molly immediately began to ask how her groom Kevin was feeling. She fainted upon hearing that he was no more. When she woke up in her hospital room, she immediately knew that something had changed in her life. From that moment, she stopped hearing. Doctors couldn't explain the reason for such sudden deafness and blamed everything on stress. She begged the doctors to let her go to the funeral of her lover despite hearing loss and a difficult mental state. But she was not allowed to approach the grave of her beloved. Kevin's parents blamed her for everything and said that if it weren't for her and her poor friends, he would not have gone to that country house. His mother literally hissed, almost throwing her fist at her. "I'll make your life hell. At best, you can only get a job as a janitor, not an economist. You will cry, regretting that you killed my son." The poor girl regretted at that moment that she didn't die instead of Kevin, because no one needs her anyway. Her mother changed roommates like gloves, and soon she burned down their house in this way. In her life, there was no work, housing, loved one, and hearing. It was impossible to earn money somewhere, since no one hired a deaf and fragile beggar girl. At first, she began to learn to read lips. After a while, she was able to earn some money by cleaning at the local market and buy a cheap hearing aid. Of course, it didn't make the world the same, but some words can be caught. Since then, she has been a wanderer. She found a small house in which she began to live. At the same time, she didn't seem to complain about life. It seemed that everything is fine with her. Her beloved pets were nearby, and they are the most grateful, close creatures for her. Molly added that when the cold comes, her friends freeze because the abandoned house is not heated. Even at that moment, she was not talking about herself, but about her pets. At the end of the story, Mr. Jones remembered that terrible accident. He was familiar with Kevin, and then he was very shocked by what happened. On the same day, he appointed Molly with the background in economics as the executive director of this branch, and he didn't regret it. The business of the branch quickly went up the hill. Soon, the owner began to come to the office frequently to pick up Molly from work. A few months later, the news of the marriage of this beautiful couple was no secret to anyone. The best gift for Molly was a document stating that she is now the shelter owner in which all of her pets were placed after she moved in with her husband. In the near future, she will definitely not have time to look after them at home. She happily prepared to become the mother of a baby. The doctor said that it would be a boy, and Mr. Jones's joy literally overwhelmed him. In addition, either an overabundance of joyful emotions or some hormonal changes unexpectedly returned Molly's hearing, and she became a completely full-fledged person. The big, spacious house of the businessman was now filled with the smells of homemade food, an atmosphere of love and peace.
All right, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike! What have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.